So what we ended up, Happy Giant, the company that was producing the Usagi Yojimbo game, ended up sort of agreeing with us that the best way to tackle this problem was to do something we're kind of calling 2.5D animation, which is honestly a little bit of a misnomer, actually, because 2.5D has been used to mean a lot of things, this is just one of the possible definitions for that term, so it is a little confusing sometimes. However, what we mean in this context is that we've rigged up a character, and it is a three-dimensional character, technically speaking, that does not actually act anything like one. So before I go ahead with further slides, I'm just going to come out of that so I can show you what this looks like. And of course, my desktop is not going to scramble itself. 1 second. Here, I think I found the necessary thing. Let me show you a little bit of gameplay from the game. It opened up on the other monitor, didn't it?
There wasn't another monitor. Remember, you mirrored them.
Yes, but I think it thinks that there is. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Let me try opening it with something other than VLC. Actually, maybe I think you're right. I think it just didn't, for whatever reason. Here we go. Oh, God. Now.
Very slow for some reason. This is a mirror.
This is a little bit of gameplay. And, it achieves a lot of the goals of, essentially having something that looks very, very much as if it was hand-drawn, even though it isn't. And I'm now going to transition to showing you what this looks like in Maya. Now, I don't know what it is you guys are particularly the most familiar with as far as, content creation tools. Raise your hand if you've used Maya. All right, so a lot of you. Maya or Max are pretty much the common things, and this technique would work fine in Max too. Maya just happens to be what we use, and it has a nice pipeline right to the Unity engine, so it makes everything much simpler. So let me load this up in Maya. Yeah, I don't really know why it does that. The ways of Maya are mysterious, and no one can ever fully comprehend it. It's just sort of the process. So here's a couple of animations of in their pre-exported state as they were animated in Maya. And I'll just show you real quick sort of how this works. So I'm just going to hide the controls for a moment. Just show you what the actual animation looks like. Oh, it's also flipping. Let's turn on polygon transparency sorting. That will help greatly. And so some of you may already be realizing that this is a very small number of polygons, actually. But what this lets us do is to sort of fully animate in Maya with the tools that we're already familiar with while getting a very 2D look. It isn't actually a full mesh. It's actually a set of planes with textures mapped on them, and it therefore takes a very little footprint in within Unity. Texture map stuff on polygons is not really that intensive, but it also lets you get all this kind of nice stuff, and you can even kind of get some squashy and stretchy stuff. Let me show you another. Another one of the cycles. Now, if I unhide the controls, the way that we are typically working with the character is not too dissimilar from how you normally animate something in Maya. We've got a whole bunch of controls here, and they adjust the character's body. We're able to do a couple of really interesting things here, partly because these are really simple sort of planes. If I go and select polygons, you can sort of see, like, that's the one for this little swoop here. But his arm is, this part of the arm is on a polygon there, and this part get some sort of nice squashy and stretchy animation without necessarily going way out of your way to do it. And you also kind of get a nice way to adjust the elbow position. You can control it very directly. One of the things that this style of working, with essentially everything being a little a piece of art out on a plane, is that you don't really have to. It's very amenable to very cartoony animation styles using what I guess I'm starting to call free rigging, meaning that this isn't IK or FK. It's something that isn't really either of those things. It is simply telling this control that it starts off from a position in between these two, and you can control the position of the elbow very directly. In a way that nevertheless allows you direct control of the position of the elbow. So with conventional forward kinematics rigs, you've got a rotating joint, and that is a pain, which is why people use IK. But with conventional IK, you have no real control over the position of the elbow. And in this case, we do. We can simply pull the position of the elbow into any specific place in the scene we want to do. And that's something you can do with a full rig, actually, a full 3D character. But it's a lot harder to set up than it is for one of these very, very simple rigs where everything is basically a polygon. There's a couple of other things we set up here, one of which is, let me see. Right, so we are able to set up different states for instance, his body. These are all just cycling through different mapped textures. And sort of adjust where his position is. If he's spinning around, for instance, this makes it very easy to show different parts of his body, even though his body is just made out of flat polygons. And finally, let me give you an idea of what this looks like in perspective. There we go. It looks like this. But because everything is always seen from an orthographic camera, including within Unity, you don't really have to worry about that. Where these things are in space is only relevant as to which one is appearing on top of another. Which is one nice thing you can do with this technique, this sort of like fake 2D technique, is that you don't have to worry as much about figuring out which sprite renders on top of another sprite, because you can actually put them forward of each other and even adjust that. We have controls here for changing. I think we have one on the sword, for instance. I think the sword. This is the sword. For changing its depth, and what that does is scoot it back and forth through the character, and that lets us. Basically decide if it's going to go behind his body or in front of it. And you just, sort of adjust, animate that, so when it passes in front of him, you swap it to behind before it goes behind it. So let me just swap back to my notes there for a second. So some of these I've already discussed, but I'll just go over them anyway. It does ensure similarity to a 2D art style, and that was something that was very important. It's just really, really, really difficult to make a 3D character look like something that has been drawn. This is also kind of important. It would have been possible for us to do these in Flash. And you can sort of, in Flash, you can rotate things, you can have some little IK tools and stuff. But you can't really squash and stretch things very well. You can't get a full rig with controls that you've authored yourself in the way that we had set up with Usagi here. This is, Maya has a lot of rigging tools. I have my issues with them, but they are nevertheless have been around for a long time and are versatile. And this gives you access to a set of tools that you wouldn't have otherwise doing something purely antiquated. And you can export it to Unity with existing tools. One of the other issues with trying to approach this in a purely 2D manner is that since the game was being done in Unity, it was a lot easier to take something with an established pipeline going into Unity. You can animate something in Maya, put it in Unity. That's pretty much how it's designed to work, and it's not something you need to spend a whole lot of time over. As opposed to trying to figure out some other pipeline based off of pulling frames, doing sprite sheets, or however you want to do it. It was just a lot easier. Familiar animation tools, animators. A lot of animators in the world know how to use Maya. Not that hard to find people who are going to be pretty comfortable animating with this kind of rig. That appears to actually have been the end of my notes. So anyway, I do have some other stuff that I can show you along those lines, but I did want to sort of throw things out to some questions, or if you guys want to ask me anything about it.
I was wondering if you could just go back to Meier's internal wireframes.
Absolutely.
So you kind of see the shape of some of those.
Sure.
frames.
Let me switch to the front for the moment. That's actually what the character looks like. If you're not looking at the texture map, so that's what makes it so easy.
So they're all just single quads.
Just single quads, and that's all they do. And the way that now there is one complication to this, which is how do you switch what quad is shown? Like what I was talking about is body, right? One of the things that we were, and this is a little bit like, one of the things we were a little concerned about was draw calls, and making sure that we did not. Because theoretically, you could have a different texture on his body, and then you could swap the texture, but then you have a different draw call for his body, and we really didn't want that. So we did end up doing, and this was really actually Happy County did a lot of the work to make this work. We did do a lot of stuff where we had some information get written out of the Maya file into a text file that was then getting put into Unity to actually on the fly change the UV coordinates so that you could show different images in a reasonable way. Yeah, it is. It's like a sprite atlas. It's not as extensive as a sprite atlas, a sprite sheet for like a a whole character, because each piece only has like 2, 3, or at most like maybe 8 different things that it can be. So that makes just things a lot easier in that regard. However, yeah, it's basically atlas.
Is that significantly more efficient than just having all of the types of body, let's say, as they're existing as different meshes and just turning their renderers on and off, like on the
Well,
fly?
the tricky part about that, and not being a Unity programmer myself, I'm not actually completely familiar with all of the problems that were associated with that, but I believe the problem there also ended up evolving into an issue with draw calls. I mean, there's nothing to stop you from having, for instance, a separate FBX getting exported for the body. I mean, actually, people have done things this way. But it's a separate draw call. It's a separate object, and that was what we wanted to avoid.
So you just basically, the character is just like a simple FBX.
Yep, it's a single FBX. It's exactly as if you took a conventionally rigged, conventional 3D character out of Maya and into Unity. It's exactly the same situation, except it's actually a collection of polygons.
Could you show us the joints?
Absolutely, yes, I know. I turned those on for just a second and then hit them. Because it is, one of the things about the way this technique is being done is I realized the joint structure wasn't as informative as I think it might have been. Because it is a whole bunch of joints floating in space. And what these joints are actually doing is they have something controlling their position. I mean, this is why the rig is kind of simple, and then they're aiming at the next thing they need to aim at. That's why you don't actually have chains of joints here. Actually, you could have had chains of joints here, I suppose, but it doesn't really make any difference. They're all getting exported. The whole rig gets baked down for export in quite the same way that you would do with a full character. And it doesn't really matter what the joints are or what hierarchy they're in. They can be in sort of a flat hierarchy. And that is what I have them as here. I should note, by the way, that this particular character is actually rigged by somebody from Happy County. We did not actually rig the character. This Usagi. But yeah, I mean, this joint is basically just aiming. And of course, it's very easy to aim in this context because it's actually a one-dimensional rotation. You only, well, all right, maybe that's not quite the way to say it. Two-dimensional rotation, maybe. It's a rotation around a single axis. And you don't have to worry about whole up vectors or anything associated with it. You're only controlling one axis. So you can just sort of consistently say, this joint is, let me just switch to, it's pointing at wherever it is that you decided it needs to point at. And it will continue to do that no matter where I pull it. And, then its position is just being controlled directly by this control. That's really all there is to it.
And sorry, the sprites themselves, you said there's like a global metadata somewhere that exports the current sprites that are being drawn?
Well,
That's the hard part, right?
there isn't, I mean, the only places where we actually need to do sprites, I guess. I mean, I guess they are sprites, actually.
Anytime you switch.
Anytime you switch textures. And that's really only happening on things like the hands and the head and the body, where you have different versions of it. The arms, for instance, are always the arms. But yeah, there is some metadata, because when we swap those things, that's not something that goes out in the FBX.
Right.
So there is some metadata, and it is being written to a text file, possibly XML. I don't recall because I wasn't working on that part of it, but that basically just tells it what frames those things are supposed to be changing and what they're supposed to be changing to, and that just gets read into Unity. Inside Unity?
No, I mean just show us that.
Oh, to show you some animation? Oh, sure. Well, I actually sort of messed with this file a little bit, but let me put it back. Oh, you mean show you with UVs right with the actual texture? It's like, oh, absolutely, I understand now. Yes. Well, let's just see that we can take a look at. Is this going to put it off the edge of the screen? Oh, it is. It did, didn't it?
You know, Brian was able to move things onto the screen. I know.
I could make it happen.
Probably yank it back.
Do you want to show your amazing Maya foo?
I make no guarantees. It was working.
You can type it into the command line.
No, I've never done it.
So I have a question,
Struck the honest.
Yeah, it's really common to use Python instead of Node.
excited about that.
Yes.
Like I have to learn a programming language that is only applicable to Maya, or I have to learn Python.
Yeah, I think the thing is like, certainly Mel used to be important, but I think it's just increasingly not. Everybody uses Python. And actually one of the things that's really, and honestly Brian can tell you more about this, Brian is the from our programmers who, have worked on a lot of our projects, can tell you more about this than I can. But it's really PyMel that it is most ideal to use.
Actually, it is, except that PyMel is really slow. So
Yes.
it's complicated. When you don't need a lot of speed, I would really use PyMel over like Maya commands module, because PyMel does make things sort of more nice and sort of object-y and whatever. Unfortunately, if you're trying to do a lot more complicated stuff in a short period of time, PyMel is not going to work. And so then you have to kind of resort to the commands module, just generally scripting Maya applications. So, but I would, we never touch Mel if we can avoid it. Yes, as Brian says, it's often.
I worked in Mel for years, and I'm still scarred.
Is there a way to interface with, like, could you write a C extension for Python? Because like I've done that before.
Oh,
Indeed, Matt is going to show you something in a little while here that is what it is a Maya plugin that is essentially a shell in Python. It's a little more than a shell, but what we did is we wrote it first in Python and it was just incredibly slow. It's now about 20,000 times faster than our initial implementation and still way too slow.
Yeah, I got it.
But what we actually did,
All right.
we used C types, which is it's actually a lot easier than writing a C extension. So it's just another file library that calls it a DLL.
So here, for instance, is one of the, this is basically a sprite sheet. Here's different conditions of his ears, and a couple of different conditions of his sword, and a couple of swoops that happen when he's moving his sword really fast, and we put a swoop in there. So,
In the Unity project, are all the different sprite sheets for a single character combined into one? Or
that is actually a question that I'm not the right person to answer,
Okay.
because that's what they were dealing.
If you're
They were dealing with
on
that in Happy
Dropbox.
Giants, and it is entirely possible that they were doing that, but that is not information that I can be certain of. It does seem like it seems like it would probably be the thing to do. And I know that draw calls were really essential to them, so
Yeah.
it makes sense that they'd be reducing them in any way that they could.
Does every vertex on these planes, is it managed just a single joint? There's
Yep.
no,
Yep. There's also, and this is another efficiency thing, there's no actual, there's point weighting, but there's no real weighting. Everything is 1 to something.
Yeah.
And that just makes, this is yet another efficiency thing, it just makes things very simple. Because where you have areas where you can even see this doesn't show up quite as much in Unity as it does in Maya for reasons of the way it deals with alpha channels. But, you can pretty much see, there's no bending happening here. This is two different pieces of art that have been overlaid, and you can even see a little bit of a, alpha channel trail what we've done here to make sure that we can make things that look like they did match up is that we have controls for, you know, how the shoulders attach to the body and stuff, so that an animator, I mean, there's just, instead of trying to figure out a great way to make that look good, an animator can just be like, all right, I'm just gonna put this in a place where it looks pretty reasonable, you know. Any other questions?
Do you have any other characters you can show us?
Actually, I do. Let's see. I haven't really looked through to find particularly good, you know, what the best examples are of different characters, but let's take a look at some things. What about leap back? Not bad. Yep. Another example here. What this looks like. It's true that his hands don't really. I mean, that is one of the things about this technique. There is a little bit of you are a little bit stuck with the art that you have, but for the most part, you know, given its advantages, that ends up working out.
And you could probably sell that with just a couple different types of hands.
Right. You could get around those issues. Yes.
So if you were to just like keep on adding bits and pieces and everything, like all of a sudden make it a little bit more complicated, but what do you think would be the point where it becomes just like you should just use sprites instead of adding more and more pieces?
You know, I think it depends on what kind of animation you're trying to do. I think that if you're trying to do really full animation, you're never really going to be able to top drawing every frame, you know? And that's sort of more of a artistic question than it is a complexity question. I mean, you can sort of make this arbitrarily complex. And in fact, in some ways, the more complex you make it, the more it kind of has an advantage over sprites, simply because, I mean, depending on how many polygons you want to render, but that's usually not really the bottleneck anymore, you know? I don't know, I mean, I think that you sort of the more sprites you need, the more advantage you get from this, in a way. Because you don't really need much in the way of sprites. And so, you have like different hands or whatever, but it's not the same thing. You get to have the data in a very compact way. And you get to have it be something that will render, I mean, you know, just like any other sort of in-game sort of project, it doesn't really have, this is actually something that, in some ways, the Flash animators were sort of helping us with this by doing different hand positions. They had a little hard time explaining to you, it doesn't have a frame rate. You know, it has one in Maya when we're animating it. But it's not like it has a defined frame rate, and this is the exact number of frames you have, and if you have more frames, you will be using more memory. No, I mean, everything's got, you know, function curves, just like any other thing that you're moving around and animating and exporting. So, you render as many frames as you want in real time, it doesn't matter. And, you know, I think that as long as you're sort of willing to put up with the fact that it is a little bit limited, but it is more limited than just going and drawing all of the stuff by hand. If you're willing to sort of put up with that, though, you know, it just has really, really significant advantages.
Sorry, I missed the beginning. You guys wrote this mostly? Did you animate with it as well, or?
Yeah, I mean, what we were primarily doing is we were doing sort of initial character rigs, and Happy Giant then took that and rigged the rest of the characters, and doing a bunch of the animation. We didn't do all of the animation either.
That was really my question, is how did you find when you gave this to external animators? Were they able to work with the tool really easily, or?
Yeah, I mean, one of the advantages of it kind of is that anyone who's sort of familiar with animating in Maya, this isn't really like a tool per se, it's just a rig. And anyone who's sort of familiar with Maya animation tools, I mean, it is a little strange because it is flat and because it is this sort of free rig where I can sort of pull the elbow around however I like, you know. But fundamentally speaking, I mean, these are controls precisely identical to anything else you can use in Maya, and you have. We're not going to go through that whole thing. I opened the graph editor. It's off screen. You can't see it, but let's just forget about that at the moment. All of the usual animation tools that you'd be familiar with are all there, and so if you have animated in Maya and that's what you do, this won't actually be that hard to figure out. I mean, I would say that the biggest problem that we had, which was really not our problem particularly, if you see what I mean, was just, you know, the usual artistic things of like, this is how things should look, this is how they should move, this is who the characters are, you know? I mean, I guess there were some technical, like, back and forth, but you pretty much always have to expect that with an outside vendor. I mean, it's funny because you say we're an outside vendor, you know, but like, whenever you're bringing new people onto a project. Anything else before I go on to the second part of the presentation? All right. So the other thing I sort of wanted to show you, and is something that we're sort of. Oh, good point. I don't want to close that. I'll just close some stuff. We just close Spotify because that just opens automatically. We opened Maya back up again. That was kind of silly. This is a new piece of software that we're working on, and we are sort of interested in showing it to as many people as possible and getting people's ideas and feedback on what it is and how it works, how it's going to work for people's workflows. It is something that is, at the moment at least, not something you can do inside a game engine, but we actually hope to change that at some point. In any case, I just sort of want to first ask, so I asked at the beginning, like, who here has worked on rigging, and a lot of people have. And so you're probably familiar with the fact that rigging is not a awesome and easy thing that you can pick up easily and do easily. It's sort of weird and esoteric, and I mean, rigging for game engines has its own particular set of constraints, but even if you're rigging for something that's pre-rendered, it's a different set of constraints, but it's really complicated, and in a lot of ways, sort of the tools that we use for rigging, the tools that like Maya and Max and XSI and all the sort of major packages have, they really were written in the late 90s, and we've certainly had usability improvements on that, but they're not really designed to do what people want out of modern rigs, and so you end up having a whole lot of work both figuring out how to form things properly, which is not an easy thing to do with the way paper tools. It's possible, but it's a lot of work, and also figuring out how to provide the kinds of control that animators really want now. Back in the late 90s, if you could have an IK handle, that was awesome. That was amazing. It's not really true anymore. We sort of expect a lot more than that. One of the things that we expect a lot is having a fair amount of control over how things bend and the kinds of shapes that you can pull a character into. One of the things that I think, sort of, hopefully not extending this preamble too far, but one of the things that I kind of feel is a central difference between the way rigging has been thought of and the way that it's going to be or has started to be thought of, is that for a long time, rigging was all about the rotation of joints. You put some joints into your character and you had a rig that figured out one way or another how they should rotate, which could be through IK handles, or it could be through constraints. You could have controls that you were constraining the various rig parts to. You could have some sort of automation using driven keys or expressions or other methods. But basically, you wanted to figure out how to rotate those joints reasonably. But what animators really want, what's really valuable, is not say that, but to say, what shape is my character taking on? And thinking about rigs in terms of joint rotation only is just very limiting and puts you in a position where you're sort of stuck with characters that are very rigid and characters that are very very hard, and where you have, in order to animate them properly, you have to come at the problem not from a direct point of, this is the shape I want my character to take, but this sort of roundabout way of, well, if I rotate these things together, it will eventually end up at something that looks good. And while it is certainly possible to break out of that, to build rigs that, sort of have much more direct sort of control, and certainly people do so and have started to do so, it's complicated. And to even get something as basic as a shoulder that performs properly is really enormously difficult. So this is something that we really want to change, and we think that we have come up with some really good ways to do so. So I am going to load up, let's see, what's this switch projects here. And I'm going to load up an arm, and I'm going to rig it real quick and show you some of the tools that we've been working on. So,
Can I just interject here?
sure.
I just want to point out, we are well before the alpha stage with this.
Yes.
And there are some things that potentially blow up occasionally. I don't think there will be big problems, but something did crop up last night.
That's right. That's right. That's why we were kind of testing it. Those of you who were here right at the beginning, we were kind of testing it at the beginning because, like, it could just explode.
This is
There
not
is
a finished
actually a chance that we will do something, we'll do this and it will just break. It could happen. Hopefully it won't happen. I think we've figured out how to make that not happen. But this is pre-alpha software, so we never really know. So let me sort of start drawing in, one second, some bones using our bone draw tool. One thing that is notable about this, it's not maybe the most notable thing about this package, but I think it's actually pretty cool, is that our bone draw tool is a lot easier to use than Meier's. Notice that it has, even though I'm drawing this from the front, it's actually ended up in the middle of the geometry here in an appropriate way. Our bone draw tool not only lets you sort of adjust as you go, but it will allow you to, here, let me, if I hit the control key, it will snap that to the middle of whatever geometry my mouse is over. Put it back over here. Which makes it really easy to draw bones into meshes. That's really something particular to Maya, just that the bone draw tools are sometimes like a little difficult to use. But it is just one thing that's worth noting. I just think it's a lot easier. So I'm just going to real quick draw some bones in here, kind of make it on. And nudge this a little bit so it will start evaluating correctly. That's why we'll have that fixed before release.
That's the bug that
That's actually the bug. We're allowed to find out if it's going to explode anything. And we will bind this mesh. Let's see if it exploded. It did not explode. There's a couple of things that are worth noting here. Thing number one is all I just did was to draw some bones into the mesh. I didn't do anything else. I did not paint any weights. I did not manipulate any settings. All I did was draw some bones, and this is the result we're getting, which is not maybe perfect. This is actually a little smoother than you maybe want. You might want a little crease in there and stuff. And we have a bunch of tools for adjusting that and allowing you a lot of control. Nevertheless, you are getting a very nice arm bend, basically for free. We didn't have to do anything for that. Now let me show you the shoulder. So first of all, shoulders are a pretty common problem. It's easy, you're probably familiar with this. And part of the problem is just rotating the shoulder and getting it to give you a decent look, which I think, our tools here give you a pretty decent look when you push this shoulder pretty far. But the other really common problem with shoulders is what happens when you twist them. This is something that anyone who has rigged a character has probably seen this sort of problem in action. You get horrible shearing and twisting and breaking within the elbow, within the shoulder when you twist it. And what you usually have to do is to make other influences. So you'll see lots of skeletons where you've got a couple more joints in here, so that you can distribute the twist down the arm. Now, not only does that add extra influences, which you then have to paint and worry about, but you also need a control rig that's going to control those influences and tell them how much they have to rotate. And frankly, Maya does not give you very good tools for doing that. It's certainly possible to do. It is an enormous pain in the neck. We have a setting. It's called Inherit Twist. And what it does is to distribute the twist, to hold the twist at the elbow from the previous joint. I mean, this doesn't have to just be, the shoulder, not the elbow. This doesn't just have to be the shoulder. It could be any kind, it could be any joint that you want it to do this at. It's completely arbitrary. It happens to be incredibly useful on shoulders though. It will hold the twist from the previous joint and distribute the twist down to the next. And aside from a little crimping in there, which would be easy enough to remove, we are getting essentially perfect deformation of the shoulder. We genuinely it does not matter how far I twist this thing. It is not going to screw up. And that is automatic. And here, let me show you what makes this even more useful. So let's say I put the arm way down here like this. And we have something here where, if you've ever tried to author one of these controls, one of these situations where you've got joints and they are, and you're trying to figure out how far to rotate a number of joints that are sort of in the middle for twisting purposes. The more you push that, you usually, when doing the math within the rig for that, encounter a situation where the arm is going to flip either at 90 degrees in this direction or 90 degrees in that direction. This is because you're going to cross the up vector. It's a really common problem. It's really obnoxious. This problem does not actually exist within the Anzovin rig tools because we do the math correctly. And there is a correct way to do the math. It's just very hard to do that within Maya because Maya is not designed to do the math correctly, basically. One second. I actually want to adjust this a little bit because I think I'm getting too much smooth That's something I can show you much better in another sort of button that another file that I have here, which is specifically designed to show off that particular feature, but I did just sort of adjust that very easily. So here's another thing I want to show you. I can add what we call a bone CV. Here's the thing about this arm. It's one chain, it's a chain of bones, or at least that's sort of what it looks like to you. But what it actually is a spline, and like any other spline, I can go in and add control points to it at any time. And this is literally something an animator can do to a rig. Doesn't really require any rig knowledge. We can even do it to a rig that's already referenced in. And all of the really nice deformation that we get here for free still happens when I sort of move the joints around in this fashion rather than rotating them. So rotation of joints is no longer sort of the dominant way to think about rigging. You can do a lot more than that. Now, keeping in mind, at this point, I haven't done any weight painting at all. Now, there is weight painting within this system, but it's not quite the weight painting you're used to. Let me show you another file that I can use to display that. So here's a character that's been fully rigged up with advanced rituals. And you can sort of see one thing here that's quite nice, which is that this spine, the character's entire torso, is one single bone. It's not a bunch of bones. There's been no weight painting within that. And I have a bone CV in the middle that lets me just sort of pull it around to whatever shape I want it to be in. Essentially, each of these chains of bones is a spline. We've got a spline for the right arm, a spline for the left arm, and a spline for the torso, which happens to be essentially one bone in the bone CV. And that sort of tends to make it act very much like a Schleifer spine. Or people call those sort of like spline IK spines. But basically the idea is I can go about moving this thing around however I like, and it's going to do something reasonable and sort of curve appropriately. Without any real extra rigging. I mean, I did constrain some stuff in here, which you can see because I'm using hip controls to move it around. But other than that, I did not have to do a whole lot of rigging to make this happen. This is basically just what the bones do. Now, what you do have to paint weights for is to define which of these splines is going to be affecting the mesh at any given time. So let me, 1 second, just sort of enter my weight painting tool here. And this is what weight painting in Anzovin rituals looks like. So we have a arm, but the arm is not a whole bunch of little influences like is most common with rigs. The arm is one single influence. Similarly, and we have let me get the torso working here. The torso, that is the influence painting for the entire torso. So you don't have to go in and do a whole lot of influence painting between one part of the arm and another part of the arm. It is just one solid bit. And let me just go in and sort of paint a little bit on this so you can see the kinds of effects that it has. So by doing this, I'm saying, well, there's more torso control on the shoulder now than there was previously, which is causing the shoulder to be a little more rigid. It means that when I bend the arm, that'll remain more rigid and won't bend with the arm because now the torso is controlled a little more. But you've got so very few things to paint that it makes it a lot easier. So how do you control things that you're not painting? Let me take a look at how one would control an elbow without doing any weight painting. So this is the same mesh that I had just shown you, but it has a couple of other things sort of applied to it. First of all, I just want to note, since this is looking at the wireframe here, one of the things you can note is that when this is bending, it's sliding, it's spreading the mesh around. We call this mesh spread, and it's actually a really potent ability. Because it can give you really fair, nice curves inside areas that are really, really hard to get them through weight painting alone.
I mean, I would say that the solution you want inside an elbow does not exist within the space with normal subspace skeletal deformation unless you add so many influences that you're, practically controlling the vertex.
Exactly. There really isn't any way to get anything quite like this out of it. And what we have here, though, are a bunch of controls that we can use to define how it looks. One of them, and the sort of simplest one to understand, is radius. How smooth and how sharp is the bend. That part's quite simple. But we also have some more sort of subtle controls for figuring out specific things. So here's spread, for instance. And what that does is define how much that sort of mesh spread that we were talking about on the inner and outer parts of the surface is happening. You can go with something that's almost like a wire deformer, which sort of interpenetrates itself quite a lot and doesn't really mesh spread on the inside much at all. This is more common, more like what you typically get with a rig. But we can control the exact amount we're spreading the mesh out to get a much nicer looking thing, or go perhaps too far. But you have full control over that. Inner smooth defines how much volume correction is happening within the joint. So I can sort of turn that up to get a nice sort of smooth inner blend, or I can sort of turn it off and get something that's a lot sharper and more creased in that. And basically between these three controls, you can pretty well control what the joint looks like pretty effectively by sort of tweaking these settings as opposed to weight painting. But there are situations in which you need to have sort of an art-directed joint. We show exactly what that looks like. And we do, although it is unfortunately something I can't show right now because Robert is talking about how this was pre-alpha software and it got broken with one of the updates that we did recently. However, we do have a pose space deformer integrated, which lets you sculpt the mesh for specific angles. And one of the things we let you do is to figure out those angles not with rotation of joints, but with the tangents of the curve, which means that you can pull stuff around with bone CVs and still get correct results. So hopefully I'm not wearing out my welcome babbling about this too much, but let me show you one more thing, because I think this really in some ways gets to the heart of what is sort of important about it, or what we feel is sort of really important about having different ways of doing rigging and not being quite stuck with the same tools that we've been familiar with. Let's say you had to rig a flour sack, and you had to do it with conventional tools. It would be incredibly difficult to not get the thing interpenetrating or crimping or doing just sort of horrible things. There are certainly ways that one can solve that problem. It would be really difficult though. This is an example of me putting a single bone chain through this flour sack. And there is one adjustment that I've made here. I've done a little bit of weight painting at the bottom and top to stabilize them, because otherwise, as I did this, you'd see these bottom bits shift around a little more than I wanted. But other than that, this is just putting a spline through the flour sack, and I can bend this thing backwards and get perfectly fair curvature out of it. Now, pushing it forward a little bit, you are eventually going to get a little bit of a ripple in here. And if I wanted to make this look perfect, this might be a situation I'd want to use the post-base deformer on to sort of get a little bit of a sort of pot belly shape out of that and a little bit of crease, However, one of the things about this is it gets you like 95% of the way down. There's a few cases you're probably going to want to go in there with the post-base deformer and sculpt exactly what you want it to look like. But what we really want is for people to have to use that kind of, sort of in-depth tools for like artistic choices, for saying this is exactly what we want to look at at this particular moment. But at any time, it's going to be doing something reasonable. It's going to be doing something that basically looks good. It may not look perfect, and you will have the ability to go in there and make it look perfect. But you should be using the complexity of rigging tools to make things that already look good look art-directed, instead of using it just to make things acceptable, which is what we do a whole lot when we are rigging. So that's my spiel about Anzovin tools.
Can I point out just one
Go right
thing?
ahead.
When Rav is talking about the kind of control with the self-penetration of the joints, etc., the impression you might get is that that's somehow joint specific, but it's really not. It's just specific to the shape that the spine is making. So any time you have something that is like that, whether it's at a joint or not in the thing, those same things apply.
Yes, let me actually show you something that I think really makes that clear. I'm going to pull, this is just sort of a cylinder that's been rigged. And one of the things I kind of want to do with it is to show you the degree to which you get sort of nice fair shapes out of anything you're doing with bone CVs or otherwise. You're not, these are bone CVs, these are not joints. There's nothing specific about joints that makes them important actually in this system. They're just how you go about controlling the spline. And the deformer doesn't care about them. It doesn't care where the joints are or what's a joint CV. It doesn't even know about any of those things. The joints are just a convenient way to control the spline. which means that when I add bone CVs in here, you can see, like, take a look in here. Imagine you were using a wire deformer or a chain of bone, and you did a curve as sharp as this. You would not see this. You would not see something where the nice spread of the mesh and the nice curvature of the material.
down so it looks like a wire form.
Sure, yeah, let me do that real quick. Unfortunately, this is not the one that I've rigged up. I'm gonna have to dig into
Turn
the...
iterations down and go along.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's iterations in the... Yeah, actually, I should be able to do it that way. That's a good point. Let me turn... oh, no, I'm going to have to actually go into the... so this is what we talked about it being pre-alpha software. Sometimes this stuff is sort of buried under here.
We kind of hooked up, put it back to the joint spot.
Oh, we do have it. You're right. You're right. So if I were to turn iterations to 0 and turn pocket patch plane to 0, this is what a wire deformer would look like. It would look really terrible. This is literally a pretty accurate depiction of a Maya wire deformer, except for the fact that our deformer twists properly and theirs doesn't. However, in all other respects, these are the kinds of shapes that you would get out of it, and they look really bad. In fact, let me switch this actually to not being smooth, because the smoothing on the fact that it's a subdivision surface in some ways hides some of the ways in which it is completely awful. On the other hand, if we go turn those things back on, and then move something, because I think it is not actually... Didn't I, or did I not? Oh, you're quite correct. I did not. There we go. That's more like it. Except it's not using the correct values. Oh, there we go. All right, fine. Pop back into place. Right, okay. We're getting something that is just far more visually pleasing than really, I mean, you can work really hard with bones and point weighting to make something look good, and if you work hard enough at it, it can look pretty acceptable. But we really want people to be able to make rigs that look good, and we want them to make them relatively easily.
The other thing is, could you maybe just look at there? I know
Sure.
we've gone on pretty long, but maybe pull it like out of planarity, but also, with the expert attributes.
Sure, that's actually,
worth showing.
that is worth showing.
Like,
So the other thing is, you sort of notice that this stuff is twisting very nicely. So I can go in here, and I mean, I can twist it as like an actual, like rotating it as you would with any other joint. But I also actually have an attribute here called twist. And actually every joint here does. I mean, or every bone joint or bone CV does too. I can do it with bone CV as well. They can give you really exact control over twist. Note that even though we are twisting this thing really up quite a lot, let's see how far we're twisting this. 381 degrees. This did not candy wrapper anywhere. This twisted perfectly.
And because it's an override attribute, with the normal twist that the thing actually generates, it would flip at 180 degrees. But with the override attribute, you can keep it just twisted.
Right. And the twisting at 180 degrees is sort of inherent in quaternion math. It wants to take the shortest path. And so if you actually take a character's arm and you rotate it back 100 degrees by just rotating something, you will actually see it flip. You'll never see a candy wrapper, but you will see it flip which direction it's twisting. However, with this override control, you can twist something 1,000 degrees and never see it. Well, your mesh probably can't take that.
You need a lot of geometry.
You need a lot of geometry to make that look good. But it will never candy wrapper as a cause in a way that's caused by the deformer. So, hopefully I haven't just like dumped this all on you in a way that's hard to sort of parse, but we really do want to get people's reactions to this. It's software we're still working on, and we'd love to know what people think. Thanks.
So you said that right now it's pretty impossible to have a drive, ready skeleton right now.
So there are a couple of things. Now, actually, there's nothing to stop you right now from having a drive at a game-ready skeleton. You do lose most of the advantages of it, though. At that point, you're back to point weighting. And yeah, you could use the spline and the twist that comes along with it to drive some joints, which would in some ways be easier than trying to rig that up yourself, because you get correct twisting for free, and all that would be nice. But you wouldn't get the advantages of the deformer, only of the spline and the way that you control it. Maybe worth doing, but you're not really getting the full effect. But you can do that right now.
It's worth mentioning that the way we've done this is to actually just completely replace, well, okay, you might know it as a skeleton buster, subsurface? No, subspace deformation.
Skeleton subspace.
Skeleton subspace deformation.
Standard influences.
Yeah. But we completely replaced that kind of deformer with our own new deformer.
in real time, along with all the particle effects people want, and putting it on the GPU. And I think that can be done, and that's something that we're really interested in doing, because modern GPUs are getting very powerful, but it's not going to happen at that speed on current CPUs.
Yeah, no, definitely not on CPUs. Although there is one thing that has been a tremendous advantage with this, which is it's very easily parallelizable. We get like if you have 4 processors, that's like a 3 times speed up, or maybe
More than that.
maybe
It's-
more than that.
I mean, it parallelizes as well as pretty much any algorithm.
Right, and the advantage you get from that is number one, so the typical issue with rigs, character rigs, is that so skeleton subspace deformation, linear blend weighting, whatever you want to call it, the tip that Meier uses, and Max uses, and everything uses, is really computationally fast. But rigs are often really slow. And the reason is, it's not the deformation that's causing the rig to be slow, it's all evaluation of the complexity within the rig. You've got this really complicated tree of nodes that is doing something really complicated to tell all of those influences where to go. You know, I was talking about the multiple influences being used to propagate twists. That's a perfect example. You end up with a pretty complicated system that's evaluating not very fast to do something that seems really basic, but actually makes your rig run a lot slower. And so what this does, even though it's much slower than linear blend weighting itself, is it takes all that complexity out and puts it in the deformer. Now here's the thing about this. If you throw a bunch more hardware at, in the sense of having more cores, at a typical rig, it's not actually going to get much faster, because it's really single-threaded, pretty much. I mean, there are some exceptions. There's something in Meier now that sort of tries to multi-thread your rig, but it really mainly just really hits one processor most of the time. So it doesn't matter how many cores you throw in there, it's not going to get any faster. The skeleton subspace deformation is relatively negligible. It might get faster, but everything else won't. But because we pushed everything here, the complexity of the rig and figuring out what the twist needs to be and figuring out what the deformation needs to be into the deformer, and the deformer does get faster the more hardware you throw at it, really in a very linear way. It means that while, technically this is a lot slower than subspace deformation, practically speaking, for the kinds of rigs that could potentially replicate an effect like this, it's way, way faster. And the more cores you throw at it, and of course we're looking at a future where having a lot of cores is a pretty normal thing, you know?
We're looking at a present where in a GPU, if you do GPU programming,
Right.
you have a lot of processing nodes.
Yes, yes. And what I'm saying is, we're looking at a future though that's even more so. I mean, right now it's like an 8-core machine is just completely normal, and we're looking at a future where like a 120-core machine is a very real, it's a very real reality. We can tell it's working on something like that right now. And this deformer can actually really take advantage of that and be incredibly fast with it in a way that conventional rigs won't. Conventional rigs may not even get much faster than that. And so that's why we think that although it would be a big project to move this into the GPU and move it into game engines, it's something we're really interested in pursuing because, we need better rigging tools, and
How
there's...
awesome would it be